Hi, Joy Olson, BlockBuster Fundraising. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and today we're talking major gifts. I know as a development director, especially when you are in a smaller shop, it takes a lot of effort to really have a strong major gift program in place, and it's so extremely important. There are two different groups that as a development director over the years that I've really looked to and followed their advice, and they even offer classes, is one Veritus Group. Jeff and Richard do a great job and offer training in major gifts, and also Gail Perry does a great major gift training class. But today, what I wanted to talk about is a series that Veritus Group, Jeff and Richard put together. Richard wrote this, a series, and I want to talk about it and present it to you because I think it is so important. And we'll give you a link to the Veritus Group, and you can check into all they have to offer for major gifts. But this is all about how to identify the donor's passions and interests, because passions and interests are what motivates them to give, what motivates your donors to give. Richard and Jeff said that they get a lot of questions about the role of passions and interests in major gift and planned gift fundraising, and how to identify them and then use them. So this series covers that. They cover why interests and passions are so important, the driver behind those passions and interests, how to identify them, and how to use them. So we start off first is, why are they so important? Conventionally speaking, the last decade thought and practice is that donors are motivated to give because of tax deductions, freemiums, those gifts that come in near every conceivable type, like reserved seats, free tickets, discounts, special invites, listings and plaques, and any number of superficial activity, invitations, and things that supposedly make a donor feel good. We used to call these tchotchkes back in the old days. There have been surveys, lectures, and trainings, all of this, even testing and direct marketing, to show this stuff really works. And a lot of fundraisers claim that they are having great success directly related to giving the donor something in exchange for the donation. Well, Jeff and Richard say this is so interesting to them because when they look at the donor files of the organizations that rely on these type of gimmicks, they see very high donor attrition, 40 to 50%, and they also see very high donor value attrition, where the same donors give 40 to 60% less over time. So they either don't come back, or if they come back and stay with you, they start giving you less. So it seems to Jeff and Richard and Veritus Group that those facts are telling a completely different story, a story of donor dissatisfaction. If they were happy, these donors, happy and fulfilled in their relationship with the nonprofit, they would stay and give either the same amount or more. The fact is that givebacks like this aren't soul satisfying. They don't fill the space in a donor's heart that longs to make a significant impact on the planet. You know how it is. We're all the same: a gadget, a car, TV set, computer, iPhone, or a piece of clothing that's caught our eye. We want it. We must have it. There's an urge inside that pushes us to get it. So we do. Ooh, and it feels good on the front end. Now we have our hands on it. And as time passes, that euphoric feeling turns to dim. The more time goes by, the more you see that your acquisition really didn't bring you as much joy and payoff as you thought. Well, that's what happens to a donor who's the recipient of the stuff, the tchotchkes that you give them in exchange for their gift. That mention in the newsletter, that recognition from the stage, that gift, they all provide the donor that immediate energy and ego bump. It feels good. It feels great. But it doesn't last. Several weeks ago, Richard was meeting with a very wealthy philanthropist. Richard said he's a kind and generous man and very smart and emotionally intelligent. Richard asked him, Paul, not his real name, you do a lot of giving and you're involved with a lot of charities in your hometown and around the world. How's that going for you? Paul said, Richard, quite honestly, I am non-profited out. Wow. Richard said, I could tell that all that business as usual wasn't filling Paul's heart and spirit. If it were, he'd be experiencing joy and fulfillment. So now let's talk about the importance of passions and interests in major and planned gift fundraising. Because deep inside the heart and spirit of every human being is a desire to do good and to have significance. For some, because of the perils of the journey, that good is buried under some darkness and it will never see the light of day. But it's there. That desire to do good and have significance is like DNA or a fingerprint. It's unique to the individual. It's been molded, carved, and imprinted into that person through the life experiences they've had. That's why they care about some things and they don't care about others. Think about this for a moment. What do you deeply care about? Write it down. We know you care. It's why you have something down on the paper right now, or at least in your mind. You do care about specific things. If you had unlimited resources, you know what you would do to address the need around you. Well, that's how every donor is wired. So identifying their passions and interests is such an important part of what you're doing in your relationship with each major gift donor. All right, now, how do you identify those donors' passions and interests? It's always good to ask the why question in a donor relationship. Why are you interested in that? Or what caused your interest in that? The reason this is so important is that you want to identify the driver of the passion or interest. There's always something deeper behind that motivation to give, and it's good to find out in a caring and sensitive way what that driver is. A passion and interest driver could be most anything. Let's take a look at this list right now. We're going to put it up on your screen. Here we go. The person is a woman. The driver is that she never had a chance to learn an instrument. So guess what? Her passion or interest is music. There's a father. The driver is his son has died of an overdose, a drug overdose. His passion and interest is drug rehab. A man. The driver is he spent time in prison. His passion, his interest is prison reform. A woman. She is driven by the fact she was abused as a child. Her passion or interest is abuse cases. And there's a young man. The driver is he was the very first person in a family to go to college. His passion or interest is education. You see more drivers and passions on the screen, and it is so important. Jeff and Richard and their team at Veritus Group have scores of stories that illustrate this. Many of them are included in the list we've just seen on the screen. And the point is this. There's a story behind every passion or interest, and that story is very often very delicate, very private, and often dramatic and touching. If a donor says, in answer to your why question, there really isn't anything, I just love what you do, it's because they're either not aware of the deeper driver or they're not comfortable talking about it yet. It's most often the latter reason. They're not in a place of comfort with you to discuss something that personal. That means that you have to add that item to your to-do list for that donor. You eventually need to find out the answer to the why. Take your time doing this and don't get aggressive about it. It's very delicate. Richard says he's going to talk about more how to do this in another post. For now, he says, just file it away that every donor has a passion or an interest, and there's a driver behind it for you to serve the donor in their quest to satisfy those passions and interests. You must know this information. Identifying passions and interests is the easiest thing to do in major gift fundraising and the hardest. It all depends on the donor. Some donors know the answer to your why question. Why are you interested in that? Others don't. This lack of knowledge has nothing to do with not wanting to share the information. It has to do with lack of awareness of what it is, or a sensitivity or reluctance to sharing it. Either way, if you can, it's good to be on a path to find out what your donor's passions and interests are and what the drivers are behind them. So, here's how Veritus Group suggests you do this. You start with a one-page summary. First, prepare a one-page summary of your organization's program categories and subcategories, a menu, if you will, of what you do. This list must include everything your organization does to fulfill its mission. Don't get too detailed. To make sure you don't limit yourself to one page, this summary has two objectives. A, to make sure you know what you do. And Veritus Group says, sorry, but many major gift officers don't. And B, to use with the donor your quest to uncover passions and interests. Next, build relationships. This may take days, weeks, or even months. Jeff and Richard have said many times that you do not, on your first visit with a donor, ask them for a gift. Do not. And maybe you don't ask them for a gift on your second or third visit. No. You build relationship and trust. You thank the donor for what they're doing. You make sure the donor understands that this relationship is not about the money, but about you helping them fulfill their passions, their interests. This is most important. While you're building relationship and you're with the donor, always have with you the program list, your menu list that you've prepared, ready to use when the opportunity presents itself. But your first objective is to build relationship and trust, to understand who your donor is, and to assure your donor that your primary goal is to help them fulfill their passions and interests. Be curious. While you're building relationship and giving out a ton of information on how the donor's gift has made a difference, you're curious about who your donor is and why they're involved with your organization. So you're asking questions, and every time you're getting ready to ask a question, you ask permission to ask it. It will sound a little like this. Joy, may I ask you a question? And/or, is it okay with you, Joy, for me to ask a related question? And/or, I know you've already answered this question, but I'm curious about the underlying reason. This is the point in your relationship where you're finding out their passions and interests and the drivers behind them. Here's how that can go. You know, Joy, one of the things I'm really curious about is why you give to our organization. Well, many donors will say, I just love what you do. That's the reason. But there is always a deeper reason, a life experience, or a longing that motivates a donor's giving. Richard says, I know for me the reason I'm so interested in ABC is because of this that you do. In other words, you explain your reason for being interested in them and make sure that you're authentic, open, and vulnerable in sharing that because it helps the donor relax and trust you. What is it about us that drives your giving? For instance, we do so many things. Pull out your program list, your menu. I'm curious to know, what's of particular interest to you? Now, the magic begins. Stop and be quiet. Once you've asked the question, let the donor respond. We used to say in stock brokerage, after an ask, he who talks first loses. So listen, pause. And when the donor responds, ask your follow-up question in response to what they've identified on the list or told you. Wow, that's so interesting. Is it okay with you for me to ask you one more question? Wait for their answer. Why is that area of particular interest to you? Then pause. And as the donor answers, ask any other questions that will help clarify the why. Now thank the donor. Thank the donor for being open and sharing. And ask the donor, now that you know this additional information, what other information that they'd like to receive from you. That would be helpful. This is critical, and it sounds like this. Joy, it has been so helpful to understand that what you're interested here at So Humane is that the reason for your interest is your total love of animals. What information could we regularly share with you, or what other involvement would you like to have that would be fulfilling and satisfying to you? This is the basic structure of identifying a passion or interest and the driver behind it. You'll need to modify it and nuance it to fit the cadence and vibe of your relationships and conversations. But one thing you must do is be sensitive and persistent in asking those questions, because understanding your donor's passions and interests and the drivers behind them is critical to your donor's fulfillment and to your success as a successful major gift officer. So check out Veritus Group. You're going to love what Jeff and Richard do. Check out BlockBusterFundraising.com, JoyOlsonGroup.com. We continually try to bring home to you all the very best in fundraising tips. You can find us on our YouTube channel, all kinds of hundreds of free fundraising tips. We're just enjoying our IGTV channel. And of course, we're here every Tuesday, 1 p.m. to help inspire you to greatness. Thanks for having been here today. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.